Alright, in this video, I just want to go through this one. Back to your assignment number 8. Okay, so it's after the Japanese occupation, right? The Japanese occupation ended in 1945. That was when the British came back to rule Singapore, to govern Singapore. Okay, and the locals were not happy with the British coming back, right? Primarily because the British were the ones who lost the war. So when they came back, right, there was a lot of growing unhappiness towards the British. But of course, there are other factors as well as to why there's this growing unhappiness. Let's look. First one is that the British did not grant citizenship to some of the Chinese-born immigrants who came over to Singapore and settled in Singapore and built their lives, built their family around Singapore. Okay, so you have this very important group of people known as the Chinese Chamber of Commerce. They are the group of people associated with the Chinese immigrants, the business of Chinese immigrants. So they held a petition to consider that the British would grant China-born Chinese immigrants citizenship over the age of 21. Yes, over the age of 21, they should be allowed to get citizenship because along with citizenship, right, you will have rights, like rights to education, rights to housing, rights to healthcare, right? Things like education, like housing, like healthcare. So therefore, it's very important, and voting rights. So therefore, it's very important that they get citizenship. However, this was a very slow process because the British had other ideas, right? The ones governing Singapore had other ideas. They regarded all these immigrants as aliens belonging to a foreign country. So they don't regard them as Singaporeans yet. They're still regarding as aliens or foreigners, and therefore did not have voting privileges, cannot get naturalization papers. This just means citizenship, okay? Citizenship papers in order to get the rights of voting, housing, education, healthcare, and so on and so forth. Okay, so they cannot get their naturalization to be recognized as a citizen yet. Why is this so important for the Chinese immigrants? Well, because they have invested large sums of money into the country, into various businesses around Singapore, and they have made their homes here. They have lived here through the occupation, perhaps, right? Through the Japanese occupation. They have settled down, they have married here, they have found their wives, their children are born here, and so they have a lot of interest in the colony. But just because they are not born in Singapore, they are not regarded as a Singapore citizen by the British. And so all these things make them very angry, right? Make them very unhappy with the way things are being done in Singapore, with the way the British govern the country. Okay, so that is the first factor, which is your citizenship. Moving on, my second factor into why there was a great unhappiness towards the British and a growing demand for the British to do something is the civil servants, right? Civil servants are the government officials, are the people working in the government. Okay, I would call them government officials, but actually it's not government officials. It also includes just the people, the teachers, right? The policemen, the army, the military. Okay, all these are all under civil servant working for the government. So why is it that they demanded for this better treatment of civil servants? Okay, very simply, just look at the background. 1948. Okay, colonial government started to recruit more locals into the civil service. More Chinese, more Indian, more Malays have to go into the civil service. Previously, it was mostly British, right? But since many British officials had to be interned during the Japanese occupation, they were sent back to Britain. So there's a lack of manpower, therefore, you have to recruit more locals into the civil service. But the concern is that although there's more locals being recruited, right, the British officials are still the superiors, right, the head of office, those in charge. So they continue to enjoy better pay and hold senior positions within the civil service. Why? Because they are the ones governing the country. They are the government in a nutshell. So they will enjoy the better pay. They will enjoy the more senior positions, not based on ability, but just because based on race, right? That they are the ones governing. So even though the locals were well qualified. Okay, and then one particular incident that angered the people was the government's decision to pay family allowance. So as long as you're British official, you will have the family allowance. But as long as you belong to a local group, Chinese, Malay, Indian, or others, then you will not have this family allowance. So there's a big disparity here. There's a huge disparity that make it very unfair for the local civil servants, and therefore they demanded that they should be treated better, right? They opposed this unequal treatment and demanded that the government raise their pay. Yes. Now, moving on, the last one, growing demands. Number 3 is local political involvement. What does that mean? What is political involvement mean? Means governing the country in a nutshell, right? Governing the country. They want to have a say. They want to have a say in the way things are run, in the policies being made, in the way the country is governed. Why would they want to have this demand? Mainly it stems from unhappiness, right? Why are they unhappy? First and most obvious one, the British didn't defend Singapore properly from the Japanese. Second, the problems the locals are facing, including shortage of housing, jobs, schools, essential items, and the black market. And then when you look around the streets, it's not a safe place. Singapore was not a safe place. There were many strikes involving trade union workers and industries. All these strikes very common. And lastly, there was a total lack of respect for local law and customs, leading to again strikes, riot, protests, as seen in the Murray Hotel riots, because the court, right, the justice system ruled in favor of the Dutch, and this was seen as very demeaning and very showing a lack of respect to local laws and customs. Okay, so these are the 4 areas in which they are not happy with the British, which led to them wanting more political involvement, more say in how the country can be governed. Yes, so they decided, because of all these things, we need to abandon the hero worship of the white man, the old attitudes. This was before the war, right? Before the war, everybody regarded the British as superior because they are the one that took over Singapore, and they have a great British empire. But after the war, Singapore, they have already experienced defeat because the Japanese took over from Singapore. So now we need to abandon this thinking that the Westerners are more superior than us. Okay, we need to involve ourselves in the country. We cannot just stand by and just make money here, right? We need to be involved in how the country is governed. Alright, so they form many different political groups. Alright, the first step to getting into parliament, getting into the government, is to form a political group first. So one of the first one formed was the Malayan Democratic Union, made out of local born. You must be educated, of course, Chinese, Indian, and Eurasians, to help form a group so that you can get into parliament, you can help fight for Singapore's independence from the British. So they held many different meetings to discuss how they wanted Singapore to be governed. Okay, so this is the first content video on the demands that the people had towards the British.